Wait a minute, the American investor blinked, and then she leaned forward in her chair and looked at Joel like she was seeing him for the first time. She said slowly, her accent crisp and commanding, "You're telling me that this janitor just explained the hedging strategy that your lead economist couldn't answer when I asked him 5 minutes ago?" Joel stood in the gleaming boardroom wearing a blue janitor's uniform that was 2 sizes too big, and every eye in the room was fixed on him like he was an intruder who had just crashed the most important meeting of the year. The American investors sat frozen on one side of the mahogany table, their expensive suits and skeptical expressions making the air feel thick with tension. Chidera, the CEO of Prestige Holdings, stood at the head of the table with her arms crossed and her perfectly arched eyebrows raised in confusion. Mr. Kehinde, the HR manager, was already on his feet, his face twisted in rage as he pointed a trembling finger at Joel and screamed loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "Security," Mr. Kehinde shouted, his voice cracking with fury. "Get this cleaner out of here right now before I call the police. He's trying to sabotage this company." But Joel didn't move, and he didn't look down at his worn-out sneakers or apologize for existing the way he had done every single day for the past 2 weeks. Instead, he looked directly at the lead American investor, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes who was staring at the presentation screen with a frown that could cut glass, and he spoke with a clarity that made everyone in the room go silent. "Ma'am," Joel said, his voice steady even though his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "The probability of failure for this project is 12%, but only if the oil price drops below $70 per barrel. If you look at the sensitivity analysis I prepared last night, you'll see we've hedged the risk using forward contracts, which means your investment is protected even in a worst-case scenario." The American investor blinked, and then she leaned forward in her chair and looked at Joel like she was seeing him for the first time. "Wait a minute," she said slowly, her accent crisp and commanding. "You're telling me that this janitor just explained the hedging strategy that your lead economist couldn't answer when I asked him 5 minutes ago?" Chidera turned to look at Kunbi, the so-called senior economist who had been fumbling through the presentation like a student who forgot to study for an exam, and Kunbi's face had gone pale as chalk. Kunbi opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out, and that silence said everything. "Kunbi," Chidera said, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through steel, "did you write this report?" Let me take you back to where this all started, because Joel's story didn't begin in that boardroom with investors and power suits. It began 3 weeks earlier on a lonely, dangerous road in Lagos where desperation and destiny collided in the most unexpected way. Joel was running that morning, and his cheap leather shoes were slapping against the cracked asphalt of the shortcut road behind the industrial estate in Ikja. His tie was crooked. His shirt was already damp with sweat even though it was barely 7:30 in the morning, and his worn-out briefcase kept banging against his leg as he ran. This was the biggest day of his life, or at least it was supposed to be. Prestige Holdings, one of the most prestigious firms in Lagos, was hiring a senior economic analyst, and the salary they were offering wasn't just good, it was life-changing. It was the kind of money that could pay for his father's kidney surgery, clear the 3 months of rent he owed his landlord, and maybe, just maybe, let him breathe for the first time in years. He checked his wristwatch and his stomach dropped. 7:45. The interview was at 8 o'clock sharp, and he still had 15 minutes of walking ahead of him. He was going to make it, but barely, and there was no room for mistakes or delays or anything that could throw him off track. That's when he saw it. A sleek black Range Rover was sitting dead in the middle of the narrow road, with thick smoke billowing from under the hood like something out of an action movie. The car was the kind of vehicle that cost more money than Joel would see in 5 years, and standing next to it was a woman who looked just as expensive. She was young, probably in her early 30s, wearing a tailored navy blazer and a cream blouse that screamed money and power. Her natural hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her gold wristwatch caught the morning sunlight as she paced back and forth, staring at her phone with an expression that was equal parts panic and frustration. Joel slowed down, and a voice in his head immediately started screaming at him. "Don't stop. You're late. Walk past. This isn't your problem." But then he saw the woman kick the front tire of the car in frustration, and she looked around the empty road with fear in her eyes, and Joel knew exactly why. This area behind the industrial estate wasn't safe, especially not for someone who looked like they had money. There were uncompleted buildings on both sides of the road where area boys and thieves liked to hide, and a stranded woman in an expensive car was the kind of target they dreamed about. Joel stopped running. "Excuse me, ma'am," Joel called out, his voice breathless from running. "Are you okay?" The woman, whose name was Chidera, spun around and looked at Joel like he was a gift sent straight from heaven. "Thank God," Chidera said, her voice tight with stress. "My car just died, everything locked up, and my phone has no signal. I think I saw some men watching me from that bush over there." She pointed toward a cluster of tall grass near an abandoned building, and Joel's heart sank because he knew she was right. This was the kind of place where people got robbed in broad daylight. Joel looked at his wristwatch again, 7:48. He had 12 minutes to get to his interview, and helping this woman would mean pushing a 2-ton SUV off the road, finding a spot with phone signal, and wasting precious time he didn't have. He thought about his father lying in that hospital bed, about the eviction notice taped to his door, about how this interview was his only chance to escape the suffocating grip of poverty. But he also thought about what kind of man he wanted to be. "Ma'am, I'm late for an interview," Joel said, his voice shaking slightly. "But I can't leave you here. It's not safe." Chidera's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment she just stared at him like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You're late for an interview and you're stopping to help me?" she asked, her voice softening. "Yes, ma'am," Joel said, already dropping his briefcase onto the grass. "But we need to move fast. We have to push this car off the road so it's not a sitting target, and then we need to get to higher ground where your phone will work." Chidera looked down at her expensive blazer and then at the dusty, grease-covered car. "Push it?" she asked, hesitating. "Ma'am, do you want to keep your car and your life, or do you want to keep your blazer clean?" Joel snapped, his desperation making him bold. "Because those men in the bush don't care about designer clothes." That got her moving. Together they pushed, and Joel groaned as his shoulders burned with effort and sweat poured down his face, soaking through his interview shirt and ruining any chance he had of looking presentable. Chidera pushed beside him, her heels digging into the dirt, her blazer getting streaked with grease and dust, and for a few minutes they were just two people fighting against the weight of a dead car and the ticking clock of fate. Finally, they managed to shove the Range Rover into a hidden patch of tall grass where it would be less visible from the road. "Okay," Joel panted, pointing up the road. "There's a spot about 50 meters up where the network is strong. Let's go." They ran together, and when they reached the high ground, Chidera's phone lit up with signal bars. She quickly dialed her driver, her voice urgent as she explained where she was. When she finished the call, she turned to thank Joel, but he was already grabbing his briefcase from where he'd left it. "Wait," Chidera said, stepping toward him. "Let me take you to your interview. My driver will be here in 2 minutes." "I can't wait, ma'am," Joel yelled, already sprinting down the road. "I have 5 minutes left." And just like that, he was gone, disappearing around the bend in a cloud of dust and desperation, leaving Chidera standing there in her ruined blazer, staring after him with something like wonder in her eyes. She didn't even know his name. Hey fam, if you're feeling this story so far, do me a quick favor and drop a like right now. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe because this storytelling family is just getting started. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Joel burst through the glass doors of Prestige Holdings at 8:17, and he knew immediately that he was in trouble. He was 17 minutes late. His shirt was soaked with sweat and streaked with black grease from the car. His tie was hanging crooked around his neck, and he looked like he'd just finished fighting in the streets instead of preparing for the most important interview of his life. Sitting behind the reception desk was Mr. Kehinde, the HR manager, a man who wore too much cologne and carried himself like he owned the entire building instead of just managing the hiring process. Mr. Kehinde looked up from his computer and the expression on his face was pure disgust, like Joel was a cockroach that had just crawled out of the gutter. "I'm here for the Economist interview," Joel gasped, trying to smooth down his shirt with trembling hands. "I'm so sorry I'm late. There was an emergency on the road, and I had to help someone." "Look at you," Mr. Kehinde interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. "You look like you just came from a street fight in Oshodi. We are a global firm, not a mechanic workshop." "Sir, please," Joel begged, pulling his CV from his briefcase with shaking hands. "I graduated with first-class honors in economics from the University of Lagos. I have a diploma in project management, and I've been preparing for this interview for weeks. Please, just give me a chance." Mr. Kehinde didn't even reach for the CV. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and smiled a cold, cruel smile that made Joel's stomach turn. "The interview process is finished," Mr. Kehinde said, waving his hand dismissively. "The position has been filled." "But it's only 8:17, Joel said, his voice breaking. "The interview was supposed to go until 9. "Get out," Mr. Kehinde said, pointing toward the door. "Before I call security and have you dragged out like the beggar you look like." Joel's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he just stood there feeling the weight of his entire life crushing down on him. He placed his CV on the edge of Mr. Kehinde's desk anyway, whispering, "Just in case." And then he turned and walked out of that glass palace with tears burning in his eyes and his dreams crumbling to dust. But what Joel didn't know was that minutes after he left, the elevator doors pinged open and Chidera walked onto that same floor. She was limping slightly, her expensive blazer was streaked with grease and dust, and her gold watch was scratched from pushing the car. The staff in the office froze because the CEO was rarely seen on this floor, and she looked like she'd just survived a car accident. Chidera marched straight to Mr. Kehinde's desk, and her voice was sharp and commanding. "Kehinde," Chidera said, scanning the reception area. "Did a man come in here just now? He was wearing a light blue shirt, looked tired and messy, probably covered in grease." Mr. Kehinde's eyes darted toward the door where Joel had just left, and his mind started racing. He knew exactly who she meant, but he had already made a decision. The senior economist position had been promised to Kunbi, his niece, a girl who had a general studies degree and barely knew the difference between supply and demand. Kunbi wasn't qualified, but she was family, and Mr. Kehinde had been planning to put her on the payroll for months. "A man," Mr. Kehinde said smoothly, his face a mask of false concern. "No, ma'am, no one like that came here. Maybe he went to the wrong building." Chidera frowned, and something in her gut told her that Kehinde was lying, but she didn't have proof. "Are you absolutely sure?" she pressed. "Positive, ma'am," Mr. Kehinde said, smiling that same cold smile. "If I see anyone like that, I'll let you know immediately." Chidera sighed and turned to leave, but just as she was walking away, she glanced back at Kehinde's desk and saw it. A single CV sitting on the edge, the paper slightly crumpled like someone had placed it there in desperation. She didn't say anything. She just walked into the elevator and disappeared, leaving Mr. Kehinde sitting there with a smug expression on his face. Mr. Kehinde picked up Joel's CV with 2 fingers like it was contaminated trash, and he looked at the name printed at the top, Joel Okafor, first-class honors, economics. He saw the phone number, and a wicked smile spread across his face. "The CEO wants you hired," Mr. Kehinde whispered to himself, chuckling softly. "Fine, I'll hire you." That evening, Joel was sitting on the floor of his tiny one-room apartment in Serula, staring at an eviction notice that was taped to the wall like a death sentence. His phone was lying next to him, silent and mocking. Because no one was calling with good news, and his father's hospital bills were piling up like mountains he would never be able to climb. He was about to turn off his phone to save battery when it suddenly rang, and the number on the screen was unfamiliar. "Hello," Joel answered, his voice hollow and defeated. "Is this Joel Okafor?" a male voice asked, cold and formal. "Yes, this is Joel," he said, sitting up straighter. "This is Mr. Kehinde from Prestige Holdings. You left your CV here this morning." Joel's heart leaped into his throat, and hope flooded through him like a dam breaking. Yes, sir, I did. Thank you so much for calling. Does this mean the senior economist position has been filled?" Mr. Kehinde interrupted, his voice cutting through Joel's hope like a knife. It went to a highly qualified professional with years of experience. Joel's heart sank again, faster and harder than before. "Oh," he whispered, "I understand." However, Mr. Kehinde continued, and there was something cruel in his tone, something that made Joel's skin crawl. "The CEO insisted that we fill a vacancy today, and there is one position available. Would you be interested?" "Yes," Joel said quickly, desperately. "Yes, I'll take it. Is it an assistant analyst role? Data entry? I'm a fast learner, I promise." Mr. Kehinde laughed softly, and it was the kind of laugh that made Joel feel small. "No, Mr. Okafor, it's a janitorial supervisor position. You'll be mopping floors, cleaning toilets, and emptying trash bins for the executive floor." The words hit Joel like a punch to the stomach, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. He was a first-class economics graduate, a man who had spent 4 years studying complex financial models and market theories, and now he was being offered a job cleaning toilets. "The salary is 100,000 naira per month," Mr. Kehinde added, his voice dripping with false sympathy. 100,000 naira. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but it would keep the landlord from throwing him out on the street. It would buy his father's medication for another month. It would keep him alive. Joel closed his eyes, and he felt his pride shattering into 1,000 pieces. "I'll take it," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Good," Mr. Kehinde said, sounding pleased with himself. "Come tomorrow morning at 7, and Joel, one more thing, don't speak to the executives. You're there to clean, not to socialize. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Joel said quietly. The line went dead, and Joel sat there in the darkness of his room, holding his phone and staring at the eviction notice on the wall. He had sacrificed his interview to help a stranger, and this was his reward: a mop, a bucket, and a blue uniform that didn't fit. But what Joel didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know as he sat there in the darkness feeling like his life was over, was that the woman he had helped on that lonely road was about to change everything. Was Mr. Kehinde's lie about to be exposed, or was Joel's suffering only just beginning? The truth was closer than anyone realized, and it was about to explode. The only way that you won't miss what will happen next for you to subscribe to this channel so that you can get the notification when the next video will drop, because it will be very interesting, and don't forget to share your thoughts on the comments about the one you have already watched.